Hey everyone, this is Candace Ewert and I'm presenting today on social perception for social psychology at Liberty University. Social perception is a general term for the process by which people come to understand one another. Social influence refers to how people are affected by others and the pressure of others. This week we visited some main concepts about social perception. These concepts are conformity, compliance, obedience, fundamentals of a group, and group performance. Kaysen and others tell us that social influences that move us are not only entertaining and funny, but potentially hazardous as well. For example, today's teens may face many obstacles that can be a bad influence on them, such as excessive drinking, drug use, unsafe sex, bad language, and many more. We read an article this week by Rees and Wallace, and it states that the social life of an adolescent is often better if he or she conforms because failure to do so risks ostracism from a group. So, conformity is defined as the tendency of people to change their perceptions, opinions, and behaviors in ways that are consistent with group norms. We view others as a valuable way to get information, often turning to them for help with situations. Groups hold enough power to shape an individual's thoughts and behaviors about certain things. Harmful consequences can come from conformity, though. For example, excessive drinking, cheating on taxes, and telling offensive jokes. We do these things because we see others doing them and we think that it's acceptable, but it's really not. So, why do people conform? So, a need to be right, fear of being ostracized, private conformity, and public conformity. So, Kaysen and others state that people conform because they want to make a good and accurate judgment of reality and assume that when others agree on something, that they must be right. So this is that innate feeling that we get of always being right. Bullet number 2 says fear of being ostracized. Ostracized is being neglected, ignored, or excluded. This can happen if someone doesn't conform to the group. Normative influence leads people to conform because they fear of the consequences of rejection. Kaysen and others tell us that our need to be included is so strong that rejection can inflict social pain that feels like physical pain. Private conformity is also called true acceptance. Others cause us to change not only to overt our behavior, but our minds as well. And finally, we have public conformity, which is also known as compliance. This refers to a more superficial change in behavior. So this basically means that we pretend to agree with something, even though secretly we really don't agree with that. So, influence. People tend to conform when the social pressure is intense and they are insecure about how to behave. This is called majority influence. Kaysen and others tell us that common sense would suggest that the number of other people, the number of other people in a majority would increase, so should the impact of the group. However, this is not that simple. Once there is 3 or 4 group members, the amount of additional influence is negligible. Changing people's perceptions of norms can be used to change their behavior. Knowing how many others are behaving in a situation is necessary for conformity, but these norms will influence us only when brought to our awareness. And finally, we have gender differences. Kaysen and others tell us that findings suggest that once familiarity with the issue is at hand, not gender, that is what affects our conformity. So basically, people are more likely to behave in gender stereotyped ways when motivated to attract someone of the opposite sex. Minority influence is the process in which nonconformists produce change within a group. These people are seen as competent and honest. However, they can also be disliked and rejected. So even though they have a nonconformist attitude and they kind of go against what everybody else says, they seem very strong-minded and strong-willed. However, they typically are rejected and not liked because that's the way they act. So next we have compliance. This is a direct request to change our behavior. So there are many psychological traps that Kaysen and others tell us about in our readings this week, such as foot in the door, lowballing, door in the face, and that's not all, folks. So first I want to start with foot in the door. This is a two-step compliance technique in which an influencer sets the stage for the real request by first getting a person to comply with a similar request. So this was created by salespeople. Next, we have lowballing. This is a two-step compliance technique in which the influencer secures agreement with the request, but then increases the size of that request by revealing hidden cost. Next, we have door in the face, a two-step compliance technique in which the influencer prefaces the real request with one that is so large it's rejected. Then they come back with a smaller request that's a little bit more reasonable, and then you think you're getting a good deal because they come back with a request that you can see yourself actually going with. And finally, we have that's not all, folks. This is a two-step compliance technique in which the influencer begins with an inflated request, then decreases its apparent size by offering a discount or a bonus. So basically, it's one of those, you buy this and I'll throw this in for free. So before we move on, I wanted to share with you, my husband and I actually kind of had somebody, I guess you could say, lowball us recently. We went to purchase we were in the market for a new vehicle, and we went to kind of a bigger city around us to go look at these vehicles, and there was a flat rate on the vehicle, so let's just say it was $38,000. So the vehicle was $38,000, and I know we had to pay tax, tag, and title, so that should be an extra however much that is. However, when we were talking to him at the very end, he said, "Well, there's an addendum that we can't come off of." There was an $8,000 addendum in hidden cost that that this dealership had put on the car. Basically, it was their money. It was not what the manufacturer said put on the vehicle. It was extra cost from the dealership. And they said that they couldn't come off of that price. The extra $8,000 had to be there no matter what the car was selling for. So that was we kind of felt like that was not fair to us because they didn't mention that up front. That was definitely something that once we kind of said, yeah, we're going to try somewhere else, they threw that in there like, oh, well, sorry, but this is why. So we kind of felt definitely like we were in that lowballing situation with that. And then, of course, we went to another dealership, and their quote-unquote addendum was like $300 versus the $8,000 at that dealership. So this stuff is real, and it is out there for sure, still taking place in the world today. Okay, so next we have mindlessness and compliance. So our mind is often set in an automatic state. We do things mindlessly. For example, sometimes I'll find myself like driving to work in the morning, and once I get there, I'm like, wow, I don't even remember leaving my house and getting here. I just know that I left my house and got to work safely. So it's just kind of like your mind is in an automatic pilot state. Next, we have norm of reciprocity. So Kaysen and others tell us that the norm of reciprocity is that we treat others as they have treated us. So basically, we have all been told about the golden rule from a very early age. So do unto others as they would have you do unto them. This is kind of the way the norm of reciprocity is. On the other side of this, though, this can be used to sanction retaliation against those who cause us harm. So you have the golden rule, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. However, you also have the old saying, an eye for an eye. So if somebody treats you bad, you feel like you need to treat them bad as well because that's how they treated you. Next, we have obedience. So this is taught from birth, typically. It's embedded in us to respect authority, such as teachers, employers, coaches, parents, and government officials. Blind obedience is explained by Kaysen and others to be behavior changes taken from a total stranger who's not really authoritative. For example, we talked about the Milgram experience or the Milgram experiment in the very first week of class. It was also brought up this week in our reading in the obedience section of Kaysen's book. So the participant was taking commands from the experimenter, even though he wasn't a true authoritative figure. This kind of represents blind obedience. He wasn't a policeman or a government official, but they still looked up to him as authoritative. So 65% or 2/3 continued to the highest shock of 450 volts in the experiment. That's a lot, but it's also crazy to think that all subjects continued to at least 300 volts. So even though they felt very scared, they knew they shouldn't be doing it, they still had that blind obedience to that authoritative figure, and they still followed commands up until it was just giving them too much stress and turmoil. And then, even though some stopped at 300, you still had that 65% continue. Now, I mean, that's over half. That's a good amount continue all the way up to 450, which was marked XXX on the shock generator. And when you see that, you just think of, like extreme pain or something that could even kill these people. These people still had that obedience since it's embedded in us from birth. They still went all the way up to that shock level. So next we have 3 factors of obedience. The first is authority, then victim, and then procedure. The authoritative figure affects the obedience we portray. When the Milgram experiment was replicated, the experimenter was replaced by an ordinary person. There was a reduction in obedience by 20%. Also, when the experimenter issued commands by telephone and not in person, only 21% fully obeyed. So this shows that actually being in person helps with the authoritativeness. So if you are in front of somebody and wanting to be taken as authority, that helps more than being on the phone with them and trying to give them commands. Also, when you are in, for example, in the original experiment, he was in a white lab coat. So that made these people think that, this is an authoritative figure, he's a scientist, he's researching this, or what have you, and they felt that he was a leader. So whenever they replaced it with an ordinary person, they didn't have that feeling anymore. So next, the victim, situational characteristics of a victim are also important factors. For example, in the research study, Milgram's participants were physically separated from the learner. They couldn't actually see the learner being shocked, so they distanced themselves emotionally as well. And finally, you have the procedure. When participants are led to believe that they were responsible, their levels of obedience dropped considerably. Also, this experiment was done at a brisk pace, which gave the participants little to no time to ponder their own values and morals. Next, we have fundamentals of a group. So, Kaysen and others define a group as a set of individuals who interact over time and have shared fate, goals, or identity. Culture can shape the nature of what defines a group. For instance, Western cultures are more likely to identify with groups based on what members do, and Eastern cultures are identified with how members relate to each other. So why join a group? As humans, we have an innate need to belong to a group stemming from involuntary pressure and increase people's chances of survival and reproduction if they lived in groups instead of isolation. In the assigned article this week, Exploring Social Identity Theory and the Black Sheep Effect among College Student Athletes and Non-Athletes, Hawley, Hosch, and Bavard tells us that an individual's identity is partly composed of their membership in a variety of social groups. There's a strong need to feel good about one's group and maintain that self-esteem by adopting strategies to protect the value of the group membership. So the complexity and ambitions of human life require that we work in groups. So next we have key features of a group. You have roles, norms, and cohesiveness. Roles is a set of expected behaviors. You have formal roles and informal roles. Formal are those designated by titles, so example, a teacher in a class. And informal roles are less obvious but still powerful. Instrumental roles help the group achieve its task, and expressive roles provide emotional support and maintain morale. Norms are rules of conduct for each group member. They can either be formal or informal. And cohesiveness, this extends to which forces push group members closer together, such as through feelings of intimacy, unity, and commitment to group goals. Many studies have shown that cohesion is associated with better performance. Lastly, we have group performance. Kaysen and others tell us that groups can perform worse than how it should perform, and this is called a process loss. Basically, a group can lose productivity due to problems within a group. There are a few different tasks within a group. Additive task, the group product is the sum of all members' contributions. Conjunctive task, the group product is determined by the individual with the poorest performance, and disjunctive task is the group product is or can be determined by the performance of the individual with the best performance. Process gain is an increase in group performance so that the group outperforms the individuals who make up a group. So as you can see, there are many different factors that make up a group and how we are socially perceived. As humans, things such as obedience, compliance, and conformity are embedded in our nature and are often taught from a very young age or even birth. Being part of a group is a necessity. Therefore, we conform to the people around us so that we are accepted in a group. Playing the right role and acting in a cohesive manner is what makes the group work. So this week, I have come up with 2 questions. The first question is, in Chapter 7 of our book, Kaysen, Feen, and Marcus compare the Milgram study to obedience. This study is an older study, but it has been replicated in different ways since then. If you were in this situation of inflicting pain on an innocent individual, do you think you could or could not really put yourself in the situation, and where would you draw the line in your obedience? Our second question, Romans 12:2 says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." There has been cases in the Bible where individuals conformed to the world and did worldly things. Pick one instance and explain how they conformed to the world and disobeyed God. Thanks for listening, guys.